If 2024 was about making plans, 2025 was the year those plans either took flight, crashed in the dirt, or got stranded in orbit way longer than anyone expected. It was a year where the old International Space Station officially reached middle age, turning 25 years old. Think about that for a second. For a quarter of a century, there has never been a moment where human beings weren't living in a giant metal tin can falling around the Earth. This year, the station was more crowded than ever. We saw a literal orbital traffic jam where all 8 docking ports were full at the exact same time. You had SpaceX Dragons, Russian Soyuz ships, Japanese cargo freighter, and even the new Cygnus XL all parked at once. But the real human story of the year was the accidental odyssey of Sunny and Butch. These two legends went up for what was supposed to be a quick 8-day test flight on Boeing's Starliner in 2024, and they didn't come back until March of 2025. Instead, because of thruster issues and leaky valves, they ended up staying for 9 whole months. Sunny, being the absolute pro that she is, decided that she would pass the time by simply breaking the female record for total spacewalking time. She ended up with over 62 hours outside of the station. When she finally splashed down in SpaceX's Dragon in March, she joked that it was the longest 8-day mission in history. Meanwhile, China's Tiangong station had its own drama, when space junk or perhaps a tiny meteoroid cracked one of their windows. They had to pull off a high-stakes emergency swap, setting up a fresh return capsule to get their crew home safely. It was a huge wake-up call for everyone that the junk we've left in orbit might be starting to become a serious hazard. On the rocket side of things, SpaceX went into a mode that can only be described as godlike. They launched 170 times this year. That's roughly one launch every 2 days. It's reached the point where people in Florida and Texas barely look up anymore when a Falcon 9 goes off. Most of these were just to build out the Starlink constellation, which now has over 9,000 satellites. But the big show was Starship. We saw 5 test flights last year, and while the first few ended in a massive explosion over the ocean, SpaceX finally figured it out by summer. They successfully demonstrated the chopstick tower catches of the booster, and they got the upper stage to reach space and splash down intact in the Indian Ocean. It's not in full service yet, but the momentum is undeniable. Not to be outdone, Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin finally got their massive New Glenn rocket off the pad. On the second try, they even managed to land the booster on the ship at sea, making them only the second group in history to orbit a rocket and bring the bottom half back home for a refill. While the big players were winning, the new kids had a bit of a rougher time. We saw a global wave of rocket debuts from startups in Europe, Australia, and South Korea, and almost all of them ended in fireballs. The European launch from Norway crashed 18 seconds into the flight. The Australian rocket kind of skidded off the pad, and the South Korean attempt failed during the climb. It was of course a sobering reminder that rocket science is still rocket science. China, however, is closing the gap fast. They almost landed a reusable methane rocket this year, only losing the booster in the very last few seconds due to an engine issue. Japan also had a tough year, with their new H3 rocket underperforming. And India had a rare failure with their usually reliable PSLV. It shows that even for the pros, space is never a guaranteed win. The moon was the other major battleground this year. For decades, private companies have dreamed of landing on the lunar surface, and in 2025, Firefly Aerospace actually pulled it off. Their Blue Ghost lander touched down perfectly in an old lava plane on the near side and spent 2 weeks beaming back high-definition photos and data. It was a massive win for NASA, whose plan is to use private companies to deliver payload to the lunar surface. But it wasn't all sunshine. Intuitive Machines managed to land their Athena probe near the South Pole, but it tipped over on its side just like the previous mission did. Because it was lying prone, it couldn't get enough sunlight and died after just 1 day. Japan's iSpace also tried again, but it unfortunately slammed into the surface at high speed. The scorecard of the year was 1 perfect landing, 1 tip over, and 1 crash. The moon is a harsh mistress. When we look further out into the solar system, the science was mind-blowing. NASA's Perseverance rover is still cruising around Mars, and this year it gave us something incredible. The first ever audio recording of the Martian dust devil. You can actually hear the grit hitting the rover and the crackle of static electricity in the wind. But the real headline that got everyone's attention was the rocks. Perseverance found these weird leopard spots, a mineral pattern in the Martian crust. On Earth, we see these kind of spots around, and they're often created by microbes. We obviously can't say for sure yet, but there is a very real chance we are looking at fossils of ancient Martian life. We won't know until we bring the samples back to Earth in the late 2020s, but the scientific community is losing their minds over it. We also had an unexpected guest from the solar system, the comet Atlas. It was only the third interstellar object we've ever seen, and though it eventually fell apart as it got close to the sun, it gave us a rare chance to see what chemistry looks like in a completely different part of the galaxy. By breaking up, we got to see minerals and compositions at different levels of depth in the asteroid, showing us what might have been unique and different in chemistry in other parts of the galaxy. Back home, the way we run space programs is changing. With the new administration in the US, we saw a shift towards even more commercial control. Jared Isaacman, the billionaire who's already flown to space twice, was picked to lead NASA. This signals a strong move away from the old government-run model and towards a future where NASA acts much more like a customer for companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin. There's of course some tension here, as scientists worry about cuts to climate research and Earth science. But the focus is clearly on getting boots back on the moon as fast as humanly possible. Everyone is now turning towards 2026, which is when the Artemis 2 mission is supposed to carry a crew, including a Canadian and the first woman on a loop around the moon. As we wrap up this review, 2025 is starting to look like the end of the beginning. We've moved past the era where space was just superpowers. Now it's for startups, for private citizens, people like you and me, and for dozens of different nations around the world. We are launching more, failing more, and discovering more than at any other point in human history. Whether it's finding potential life on Mars, building a traffic jam at the ISS, or finally getting giant reusable rockets to land like something out of a 1950s sci-fi, we are living in the golden age of space exploration. The only question left is what happens when we finally put humans back in deep space next year. If 2025 was any indication, it's going to be one hell of a ride. On to 2026.